Good morning. Thank you so much for your patience as we get ourselves organized, and we see all of you as well. So will the secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson. Present. Assemblywoman Bacchus. Assemblywoman Brown May. Here. Assemblywoman Dickman. Here. Assemblywoman Gorlow. Here. Assemblyman Hafen. Here. Assemblywoman Haddocky. Here. Assemblywoman Kasama. Here. Assemblyman Miller. Present. Assemblyman O'Neill. Assemblywoman Peters. Here. Assemblyman Watts. Here. Assemblyman Yeager. Senator Canizaro. Senator Gocochea. Here. Senator Harris. Here. Senator Neal. Senator Wynn. Here. Senator Severs-Gansert. Senator Titus. Here. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Here. Chair Dondero Loop.
Here. Thank you very much, and please mark those that are not here present as they arrive. We have a couple people that are running behind. We have one agency on the agenda this morning, and we'll be hearing from the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and they will be presenting 4 budgets. Budget account 101-1521, the Governor's Office budget 101-1526, 1531 and 1533, the Nevada Knowledge account. So I see the team is ready to rock and roll, and we are with you. So please begin your presentation when you're ready.
Great. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for your time this morning. We look forward to this conversation about how to spend the people's money. That's what we're doing. So just a little overview of GOED. We were created in 2011 through AB 449, and by and large are governed by NRS 231 to encourage diversification of the economy in the state of Nevada and diversify opportunities for employment as well as taxation throughout our state. As we go forward here, you can see that we engage a number of development partners. We go forward, we look towards our RDAs. There are 8 RDAs throughout the state of Nevada. If you're in northern Nevada, you're familiar with EDON, Southern Nevada, LVGEA, and in the rural parts, there are various other outlying RDAs that administer the needs of those areas. Regionally, we look at counties and other development agencies such as everywhere from Douglas County, Humboldt County, Clark County to work with those development and economic engines for those regions, as well as municipal partners, chambers throughout the state of Nevada, and finally state agencies as we look to streamline the process and making landing for our new private partners as they come into the state easier. You'll see as we move forward the organizational chart for GOED. We currently have 41 FTEs funded. I'm going to let Michelle speak to this more directly. We're looking to restore 2 FTEs that we lost during COVID. And again, Michelle will address that more eloquently than myself, to be honest with you. So what's our strategy? Where do we want to head? As I said, our goal is to diversify our economy. Be more innovative. We have an opportunity right now in the state of Nevada because of our presence of lithium and the onset and early emergence really of electric vehicles, EVs, to become a dominant player in that role. And we look to become that a part of our strategy certainly is to reach out and be part of that innovation as we move forward. A big part of our economic advantage is here our location. We border the 5th largest economy in the world, something that we look to take advantage of based on our location and our strategy towards business. Finally, we want to be sustainable, and we want all regions in our state to diversify. Certainly, I think you've experienced that Northern Nevada has had great success in diversifying its economy and recognizing that there's been some growing pains along those lines and need to address those. And I think some of my partners and other agencies are looking to do that, and we're trying to be sensitive to those needs too as we move forward. But Southern Nevada certainly has some opportunity to grow in that area, and we will be looking to attack that aggressively, as well as addressing the needs of our partners in other parts of the state. We want to take we need to be mindful, of course, as we do that, of our constraints wherever we're at. Some of those are lands, and we're working with our federal partners to alleviate some of those issues. It takes a minute, as I'm learning. Also, we have some issues with water. I'm sure you're very aware of those. And then we're working very diligently towards workforce development. I think there's an area that I'm very pleased about the progress that's happened recently in the state of Nevada, specifically with partnerships as we move forward with TMCC and Western Nevada College. What are the tools we use? I'm certain that you are familiar with the abatement rules. I don't need to bore this committee with that, but that is certainly one of the things that we use. We also have other development tools that Karsten will be going into, such as the Knowledge Fund, the small business credit initiatives. That's a big win for our state that we've experienced recently, and Karsten is a big part of that success, so I don't want to steal his thunder. Apex Accelerator, which helps small businesses work with the government as we move forward, emerging tax programs, and then the Film Office initiative is also something I'm sure that's risen to your attention as we move forward. As part of our, pardon me, as part of our tools in support of both our citizens of our state and companies are moving in, workforce development is a critical part of what we do, and have the WIN initiative and others as we move forward. And again, as I indicated, a partner with our community college systems and our higher education to help our citizens take a hold of that brass ring that we're presenting to them and move along. Finally, we have some community partner grants that we're able to administer and have had great success. The Rural Community Development Block Grant and Nevada Main Street have had great success in rural parts of Nevada, as well as our entrepreneurial programs. One of the things that we're fairly proud of at GoEd is our website was rated the most transparent website among our peers throughout the United States. So, and that was not by us, by the way. We attempt, we deal with sensitive information, as you can realize. We often had trade secrets that are at our disposal, that if we were to divulge them earlier, their competitors could back into those trade secrets and have access to them. And if those were in fact made available, I think it would discourage a lot of people that are considering Nevada from moving Nevada, as we're in a pretty competitive landscape, and those things will move on. But as we go forward, we certainly are mindful of how we spend the people's money and want to be transparent in that process. So what have we accomplished? In the last 5 years, 90 companies have moved to Nevada via GoEd. They account for 13,900 jobs, just short of 14,000, $850,000 of annual wages, and $3.8 billion of capital investment. And over the next 10 years, those same companies will account for $1.5 billion in additional tax revenue to our state. As we move forward, I'm going to turn over to Bob Potts to go over additional economic development environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Burns. For the record, Bob Potts. I'm the Deputy Director here in the Governor's Office of Economic Development. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chair Dondero and committee, for having us here. So I would like to build a little bit on what Director Burns has talked about on his last slide, and some of the activity that's gone on in the agency over the last decade or so. There's a lot of confusion, or a lot of folks think that the economic development and economic growth are kind of one and the same thing. And they're highly correlated, but they're different. Economic growth talks about change over time. Economic development talks about how that change happens. It's the how part that we play a big role in. And especially when you're in a state that's historically grown as fast as Nevada has, being part of how that happens, I think, is critically important going forward. And the partnership that we have with all stakeholders in the state is critically important for us going forward. What Nevada has always faced and continues to face is a very pro-cyclical economy. And what I mean by that is we have higher highs and lower lows than the national business cycle. When things are good, it's really good. When it's bad, they can be challenging. And a big goal of ours is to figure out how do we mitigate the amplitude in that business cycle to help ourselves become more resilient and sustainable going forward. So I think over the last, Director Burns talked about a few of the stats since 2019, what's happened. If you go back to the last 10 years and I looked at the assisted companies and the industries that we touched, 39% of them were manufacturers. And that's not just abated companies, that's all assisted companies. 39% of them were manufacturers, 20% were in the logistics and operations space, 14% information technology, and when you look at healthcare and aerospace and defense, 10%, okay? So we've had a big push, but as we know that's happened differently in different parts of the state regionally, and we want to make sure that we can continue to move addressing the specific needs for different regions within our state. So this map here, this is a measure of diversity, and it's just one of the many data tools that we use to, as I go forward, I want to briefly talk about our recently released 5-year strategic plan. What this map measures is it's a diversity index. It's a Hockman index. It measures, if you had an index of 100, it would mean all the slices of your industry pie would be exactly the same size. And if we compare ourselves to our neighboring states of Utah, Arizona, and Colorado, we fall quite a ways behind. For instance, in Utah, it's at 95.5%, Arizona, it's at 95.9%, and in Colorado, it's 94.2%. We sit at 73.8%, so we've got a lot of work in front of us yet in order to become fully competitive for the same target sectors that we share with our neighbors. So we've had a lot of success. We've got a pretty good track record going forward, and the pandemic, quite frankly, has set into motion some huge opportunities for us as well, with some structural changes that have happened because of changes in consumer purchasing behavior and our proximity, as Director Burns had mentioned, to the 5th largest economy in the world. So with that, I'd like to turn to the next slide and kind of give you, I got 2 slides here I want to talk real briefly about our strategic plan. So we've titled it Realizing Nevada's Electric, Innovative, and Connected Future. We worked with SRI, Stanford Research Institute, to help us with this analysis and do this work. It's a 5-year comprehensive economic development strategy, and what that means, fondly called SEDS. That's the approved strategy, the framework from the Economic Development Administration. And what it allows us to do is to be able to apply for EDA grants, so we can check that box. But the great thing is anybody under the umbrella of the state can use this strategy to check the box. So for instance, a county wants to apply for an EDA grant, they can use our strategic plan to apply for that. So anyways, it's a strategic plan, it's bread and butter, it keeps us moving forward, and everybody kind of agrees to the structure of how it's set up. So if we look at this slide here, the first, there's our mission statement, I won't go over that. The economic and community assessment, that whole section with the sub-bullets there, that's essentially all the analysis, the data, and the stakeholder engagement that we have. So both the quantitative and the qualitative input that went into putting the plan together, including coming up with our target sectors, the SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, where they identified things like our proximity to California and our natural resources, some of the weaknesses, lack of coordination, that's what happens when you're growing so fast and everybody in these silos, challenges that we have with land, the right workforce that fits the type of industries that we're trying to grow. But it creates huge opportunities when we think about infrastructure. Over and over we hear that Nevada is an amazing place to land. There's just no place for people to land. Okay, so we need to work on that one. And we have a huge opportunity, for instance, in entrepreneurship in the innovation space. And my colleague Karsten Heise is here. He'll talk about some of the work that he's doing specifically in that. I think that's a huge opportunity for us going forward. And then on the threat side, I've talked a little bit about the pro-cyclical economy that we have, but also what we deal with when it comes to the water scarcity issues. But even with that one, it creates an opportunity for us. We've got within this our strategy and action plan, and I'll talk about those strategic initiatives on my next slide, but there's also a performance and evaluation portion in there, so metrics about what we're doing, how we're getting there, and a leadership plan for inclusive growth. So if we go to the next slide, this is our strategic action steps. So the first one, Electric Nevada, where we assess and strengthen our EV production vertical supply chain. This is a huge opportunity from bookmark to bookmark, from extractive mining to final demand auto manufacturing and all points in between. And Nevada has that closed loop system, or the opportunity to really close it up, which is a huge opportunity for us. Renewable energies, including solar energy, support the completion of utility connectivity, and support the build-out of the EV infrastructure while we're building out other infrastructure. When we think about innovative Nevada, that's this whole innovation, entrepreneurship, startup side of things, but we need to coordinate it. It lacks cohesiveness. There needs to be a unified vision for this. We need to work on creating capital access, and again, my colleague Carson will talk about that in a little bit. Strengthen the university technology transfer system, critically important. And then the last one I've got here on water scarcity policy and innovation. So we have a huge water scarcity issue, but that also creates a huge opportunity in this space to be world leaders in addressing some of those issues. And then the last one is Connected Nevada, and that has to do with roads, rails, transportation, industrial parks, things like supporting the development of a multimodal inland port, tech-ready industrial parks, thinking about investment in freight rail and airports, and how we're thinking with airport-related infrastructure, as well as broadband and connectivity on that side. So I am going to end my section here, and with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, our Director of Administration, Michelle Lynn, to pick up on the budget.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Michelle Lynn. I am the Director of Administration with GOED. I'll be walking us through the next portion of our slides as the budget overview, and we'll get started with the first slide. We have a slide here representing our funding sources for all our budget accounts, and as you can see by the pie chart, general fund is the main portion that funds GOED's agency, followed by federal funds. We do have a couple of programs that are entirely federal funded. The next slice of the pie that is identified as other funds, those represent fees in other budget accounts, a couple others. And then our last little gray portion shows the interagency transfers that we receive. We do receive Department of Tourism dollars for our film office. And then we have currently a partnership with GOED where we are funding a specific project called the Sandy Grant. So that gives you that brief overview there. I'm going to move on to the next slide. We're going to start with 1526, a little bit out of order with the agenda, but the reason we're starting with 1526 is that is our main framework of economic development and operations, basically like an administrative account in the agency. This is where most of the FTEs reside, and a lot of personnel costs come out of this budget account. I have some budget highlights listed here of enhancement requests. The first two, E127, E352, are both requests for new positions. E127 is for an addition to our fiscal unit. As we have progressed and grown, it's time, the workload has increased, and it's time to add another position to help us out with that. E352 is a new request for a business development manager. That is, again, with the opportunity that my colleague Bob has described, we have growth happening within GOED agency. And this development manager will be placed in the south. We'll balance out the team. We have one in the south currently, two in the north, and more boots on the ground for business development. The next enhancement request, E353, is to bring our regional development authorities, or otherwise known as RDAs, our important partners, back to pre-pandemic funding levels. This will get them back to that. That restores them. We have some one-shots aligned here. We have the first one is E126 one-shot. It is requesting certification training for 4 of our development managers. It is very important for our agency to retain our employees, and that certification will also enhance and bring forth that progress that we're looking for. The E252 one-shot, we are in the midst of obtaining space in our Carson City building right now, 3 offices, and we will need to furnish those offices in order to utilize them properly. The E350 one-shot is a request to increase support to our RDA partners. It is a one-shot at $700,000 for the biennium, and we will disperse that accordingly to get them supported in that increase request. The last one, and very typical in all of the state, is just a computer replacement hardware. First year is for 5 computers, second year is for 1. We're going to move on to the next slide. Budget Account 1521, otherwise known as the State Small Business Credit Initiative, or SSBCI. We received an award of allocation from the U.S. Treasury for this program specifically. We were notified back in October. We obtained IFC approval. The award was approximately $112 million. We obtained approval from IFC for the first tranche of $35 million, and the program is up and running right now. This is a solo program that is strictly funded with these award allocations, and I'm going to introduce Karsten Heise at this point to give us more details. He is our Senior Director of Strategic Programs and Innovation.
Thank you, Michelle. And for the record, Karsten Heise with GOED, Senior Director for Strategic Programs. I also oversee the SSBCI program, so I'm the SSBCI Program Manager. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having us this morning. Let me give you sort of a brief overview of what SSBCI tends to achieve, a little bit of history, and where we are heading. So the program is as old as GOED, or as young as GOED, however you want to look at it. It originates from the 2010 Jobs Act, the last great economic crisis, the financial crisis, which basically had all the credit markets freeze up. Banks, investors did not lend nor invest in small businesses. So Congress passed an act to get states working on programs to design them according to their respective economic needs in order to get those private sector lenders and investors lend and invest back into those small businesses. So that is the history of it. We have run since inception 2 programs. One is the collateral support program, where we put up a portion of a collateral shortfall by working with a lender. And we have, about a year later than the collateral support program started, run our venture capital program. GOED has, at that time, contracted with Ms. Mandy Elliott, who sits right behind me, to run the collateral support program, and I have run the state venture program since inception. And the federal program sunset in 2017, but GOED continued to run it, so this is why you still have a budget account for SSBCI. And this slide sort of shows a bit of data, how much we have done under collateral support. About $13.9 million we expended. That includes recycled funds, because the Nevada received $13.8 million overall last time round. We expended about slightly more than $6 million invested under the venture capital program that includes 2 university spinouts as well as 4 exits. And more importantly, I really like to look into the future. So the slide already indicates here that we are going to run 5 programs. And we have a website, as Michelle said, the program's up and running. I strongly encourage you to check out the website. It's highly user-friendly to navigate through it and see for yourself what we are doing there and how we engage with small businesses. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So fast forward, financial crisis, next crisis, the pandemic. So Congress reauthorized SSBCI, and again, the same similar objective to have the support lending and investment in or to small businesses. But this time around, $1.5 billion nationally was under the 2010 Jobs Act. This time around, $10 billion, so vastly increased program, as well as a much broader focus, a much broader scope. So this time around, while extending and serving capital needs of small businesses, a major focus was placed to have that access to capital equitably distributed. So especially focus on underserved communities, and the federal government has a wonderful acronym to this. They call it SETI, Socially Economic Disadvantaged Individual-Run Small Businesses. So that is going to be a major focus of this program. And again, like last time around, a large focus on entrepreneurship and startup formation support through venture capital programs. So you might as well ask, okay, fine, SSBCI program, he's talking a lot about, what it did, what it's supposed to do, but, how does this really work? Well, let me go through, a couple of characteristics. First of all, this is not a grant. So as I mentioned, the federal government is trying to get states design programs in order to encourage the private sector to lend and invest in small businesses. So by default, that includes a co-investment or co-lending. So this is not a grant. We can't go in just by ourselves. We need a partner, we need a lender, we need banks, we need community development financial institutions, short CDFIs, or we need venture capital or seed funds to invest alongside us. As I mentioned, this is not a new program, and I'm sort of proud to say that we actually are one of the very few states that have substantial experience in running this program. And nationally, there's a little group that sort of meets and under sort of Treasury guidance, and it's the same individuals that were around last time, and we are still there. So we have that experience, and actually that helped us design the program and run this program. And as I mentioned, Ms. Manny Elliott, who's sitting behind me, is back, and we are working on this program together. So we have that experience. So that is actually really important because a lot of other states have struggled to get the application through Treasury review. As I mentioned, it's a much broader scope. I mentioned SETI focus, socially economic disadvantaged individual small businesses, very small businesses. Very small business here are defined less than 10 employees. Full-time employees, that is. Tribal governments are carved out separately, so they run through a separate application. It's not going through the state application. And technical assistance is receiving a dedicated portion of the SSBCI portfolio. As I mentioned, co-investment, co-financing is an imperative. 1-for-1 at all times, so at least match us 1-for-1, but over the period of the program, which we expect to run for 10 years, at a minimum, that's the federal expectation, although our design is really what we call evergreen, so in perpetuity. The goal is 10-to-1 leverage, they call that, which means $1 of federal money is attracting $10 from the private sector over time and over, on average, over the entire five programs. We every state can select from a menu of incidentally also 5 program types. It doesn't mean that we selected one of each. We actually selected 3 out of the 5 and have just different iterations of one program. I mentioned CDFIs before, community development financial institutions. That is a major focus for us this time. These are mission-driven lenders. This is a strategy to reach deep into the socially economic disadvantaged individual communities. And what we're trying to do with our 5 programs, we're trying to cover the entire funding continuum. So from which we basically, this means from startup right through to where you are just at the cusp of being bankable to bankable status. So take the small business along this continuum, and for each of those segments, we will have a program available that's dedicated for that for that segment, for that stage. One thing I wanted to mention, I don't want to go into detail here, but this is economic development driven, the design of our program. We came up with 4 themes, we call it. Under these themes, these are forming our economic development goals, and we are using these programs as tools to achieve those goals. As Michelle mentioned, we got about 113 million, give and take, rounding up. It's a fairly complicated calculation of how this is being distributed. It's allocated to the state over 3 tranches of almost equal size, 0.33 for the first 2 and then 0.34 for the last tranche. There's a portion in there which is called the SETI incentive. So each state has been given a target. If we meet this target, or if we're getting close to this target, then a portion of the SETI incentive can be drawn down. So it's 105 million plus the SETI incentive, which gets us to the roughly 113. We have been given 3 years to deploy the first tranche, but we can deploy faster. Once we reach 80% of a tranche, we can draw down the subsequent tranche. And let me close by just mentioning the technical assistance portion that hasn't been allocated. It has been allocated to the state, but it hasn't been wired to the state yet. We are still under the review of Treasury, but I'm fairly optimistic. I'm actually very optimistic after being the first state to be reviewed and having a call with Treasury last week, that we can start the intake process by probably March, April, probably more March than April. We received slightly more than 2 million there. The SBDC, Small Business Development Center, is the sole sub-recipient. And with that, I hand it back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Karsten. Michelle Lynn for the record. We're going to move on to Budget Account 1531, Workforce Innovations for the New Nevada, otherwise known as the WIN program or the WIN Fund. I recently learned this was the first workforce development training program of its kind. And we have 2 enhancements in this budget highlight. The first one is a request to actually fund the startup and support costs for the WIN program for the workforce and economic development. The second E125 is a one-shot, and that was designed to add to and address the targeted industries for expanding these training programs. My colleague, who is the program manager of WIN in the South, her name is Stacy Bostwick. I'm going to turn it over to her and let her give you a little more detail on the programmatic side. Stacy?
Thank you, Michelle. Stacy Bostwick for the record. I'm the Director of Workforce Development for the Governor's Office of Economic Development. I'm going to take them a little bit out of order and talk about the enhancement 125, E125 first. It's relatively straightforward. This enhancement provides $20 million in one-shot funding from approval through the FY 24-25 biennium for the WIN Fund. So essentially, this enhancement replaces the traditional funding in each year of the biennium that has historically been utilized to allocate funds. GOED will continue to administer those funds per statute. We anticipate making significant investments in workforce development training infrastructure, and that ultimately means that we're developing or expanding programs connected to usually advanced manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, and technology. This is in accordance with our state economic development plan, which Bob Potts ran through, and is always in support of new and expanding Nevada industries. This new enhancement, E127, comes to us from the Nevada System of Higher Education, which is a $24 million initiative seeking investments to build capacity in workforce development programs for 5 institutions. This enhancement has been assigned to GOED in an effort to align workforce development investments with economic development. This is all, of course, in the spirit of cultivating coherence in workforce systems. We will work with NSHE and the institutions to identify priority industry needs for workforce talent and for the funding associated with this enhancement. It is important to note that the bulk of this enhancement is focused on providing additional staff and equipment for the purposes of capacity. And despite the note that you might have in front of you, it does not include funding for the Workforce Incentive Grant. Thank you.
Michelle Lynn for the record. We'll move on to the Budget Account 1533, which is known as the Knowledge Fund. This is a program that is in partner with the universities and the research institutes. We have a one-shot request to restore the funding back to its original inception in 2014 to $10 million for the biennium. With that, I'm going to turn over the program details to my colleague, Karsten Heise.
Thank you, Michelle, and Carsten Heise for the record. Let me give you a little bit of background about the Knowledge Fund, and we also have in the audience representatives of the 3 research universities, and with your permission, Madam Chair, I would hand over for a brief summary in a few minutes to them as well to drill into more detail. They are much more able to speak specifically to those projects than I would be. The Knowledge Fund, similar to SSBCI, is again as old or as young as GOED. The Knowledge Fund was put in statute during the 2011 legislative session that also created GOED and was then subsequently funded in 2013. And part of the statute that ask us to report to the universities as well as the agency to report on specific matrices, and these are you can find on the slide in front of you. Currently, we have about 5 projects that we are funding. Cumulatively, we have been supporting more than 20 projects since 2013. Those metrics here, as I said, in response to what's required by NIS to report on. But frankly, these are numbers, and numbers are abstract. And to really assess, what the good things that the Knowledge Fund does, or the performance of the Knowledge Fund, yes, numbers serve, one part. But what really, can get the message across are really stories of success and description of what we are supporting, and that's what we try to capture on the next slide. So before I sort of go into a brief overview of what these success stories are, or selected, not all of them obviously, far from it actually. I would like to sort of point out that the Knowledge Fund is not a standalone program as such, as a concept. It's not, here's a program, do something with it. But what it really is, it's an integral part of what I run at GOED, which I call innovation-based economic development. So it's a core tool, and my colleague Mr. Potts has already referred to the core strategy of innovation going forward, and the Knowledge Fund is a major integral part of this. So it's by no means a standalone program, and GOED has spent a lot of time actually devising the strategy and coming up with the rationale built on upon the statute of how we implement this program. And innovation-based economic development is that framework that drives the activities of the Knowledge Fund. So the real question, the important question really is, how does this project impact every Nevadan? What does this do for the state and for the citizens of our state? So I highlighted a few. DRI, we funded a project that has no sunset, but the project itself is going on. It just doesn't receive any more funding, which is called the Health in Nevada project. And that's, through the formation of the Innovation Health Initiative Institute that was formed up at DRI. It's the largest community-based population health study in the world. It consists of DNA-based screening of about 27,000 Nevadan volunteers, and it scans for generic risk. Nothing gets more personal than health. So that really affects every Nevadan who is, potentially participating, as well as coming up with solutions that could be rolled out and scaled up over time. Dr. Burns has already mentioned, we all know, this state is an arid state. We have major water challenges here. So again, this is very personal, affecting every Nevadan. DRI, what we funded, and again, since sunset and spun out, is a non-profit 501c6 WaterStart. WaterStart really looks at what are the challenges in the state for water, of water, of members of WaterStart. That these are large resorts, for example. These are water utilities. How can they tackle those challenges? What technologies could they potentially use that makes us more efficiently use our scarce water resources? So they have run more than 42 pilots that were funded through that initiative. More than 400 technologies were evaluated. They were tested on the ground in the state, and this is a major tool to bring these businesses that develop those technologies to the state. So it's a clear attraction tool while bring them to the state, creating jobs as well as solving or at least mitigating our water issues. And also that by forming that as a sort of side note I put on this slide, recently, just less than a month ago, WaterStart was through the formation, being through their existence, we were able to lead a National Science Foundation Innovation Engine grant application, which all in all will comprise of $160 million if this is being won. But this is, I don't want to focus you on the money amount here, but on this opportunity. Once you form those entities, once they spin out of the universities, you can actually then go further and actually utilize them for additional benefit to the state. This is really the message here. At UNR, the Nevada Center for Applied Research, or short NCAR, that's the acronym, that really follows a concept that GOA developed, which we call Applied Research Center concept. So Nevada Center for Applied Research is an applied research center, follows this applied research center model. The idea behind here is to create innovation on-demand services for the private sector. It is basically the conduit of the private sector to engage with the university. So this is not a small deal. This is actually a massive deal because, as you can imagine, for a private technology company to engage with the university, with the bureaucracy, with individual PIs, is very daunting. This is a conduit. This is a mechanism of how the universities connects with the private sector. It has, yielded major successes. Just very recently, a couple of months ago, American Battery Technology, company that is an affiliated company of NCAR, was awarded $58 million initially from U.S. Department of Energy, and then an additional $10 million, so $68 million in total. That's more than the entire Knowledge Fund received funding since inception. So you see this payoff here, how beneficial and how successful it has been. Again, the question is, what does this do for Nevadans? The NCAR, again, putting in place jointly with GOED a concept which GOED developed, which we call the living laboratory, which is a real-world environment where technologies are being tested, infrastructure is put in place. University is calling this the Intelligent Mobility Initiative. What we are talking about here is we are equipping Regional Transport Commission (RTC) buses with data collection equipment, with sensors. We are putting sensors in place of in the infrastructure, and for example at intersections. So you might think this is okay. This is very nice research, but really what it means is when you put this equipment on the bus, you can effectively create a digital copy of reality. So you can, while the bus is driving, pick up, okay, here's the pothole. There is a failure of infrastructure. You can address this immediately. So you're reducing cost, and it's much more efficient if you put infrastructure, immobile infrastructure in place, an intersection, for example, at crosswalks. You're saving lives. And this is what we are doing here with under this living lab. UNR and UNLV also support very early stage deep technology small businesses by coaching them for applications to the small business innovation research run through the SBA. This is also called America's Seed Fund. So this is a big deal because we are ranking fairly low here nationally. So our small businesses really need help, and UNR and UNLV, through an initiative there, are able to do that. UNLV, if you haven't toured the Blackfire Innovation Center, please do so. I urge you to do that. You will be blown away. Blackfire did develop out of the Global Gaming Capital Initiative that we funded. It's a sort of indirect result of the Knowledge Fund. It is again a sort of living lab concept where students can obtain hands-on experience. Entrepreneurs can test their ideas in a safe environment, and industry can co-locate. I listed a few companies here on the slide, but it's really more than 100 which have co-located at that facility. So it has been an absolute mind-blowing success story. And we're also looking at technology to market. That's a major objective of the Knowledge Fund. And I put just two examples here for UNLV. Again, what does this do for Nevadans? A technology that's being commercialized, a company that's been formed, that spun out of the university, is mitigating fire risk of lithium-ion batteries, and another company that spun out is developing a technology for pedestrian safety through a concept called the rumble strip. It's basically when you approach a crosswalk, then this a rumble strip will be lowered, and the car will then be alerted that there's a pedestrian crossing. So this is saving lives. So with your permission, Madam Chair, I would like to hand it over to the universities. I see that Dr. Bo Bernhardt down in Las Vegas at UNLV is there. With your permission, I would like to hand it over to him for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you. For the record, Dr. Bo Bernhardt, Vice President of Economic Development at UNLV. It's a tremendous honor to get to speak on a program that this legislature must be very proud of, this Knowledge Fund. A little bit of history. This was born a decade ago out of a glance eastward to Utah. You heard Utah's dynamic and diverse economy referenced earlier. Our neighbors in Utah had catapulted that economy, achieving these outcomes with their own version of the Knowledge Fund, and then watched as the University of Utah system launched what is now famously known as Silicon Slopes, while famously out-patenting MIT. Nevada's investment was out of necessity, more modest. Utah's legislators had decided to devote, in a single legislative session, $560 million to their version of this in an effort to diversify and dynamicize their own economy. But thanks to the Knowledge Fund, we now boast our own innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem that you're going to hear a lot about here today. Up north, I know my friend Carlos Cardillo is up there. If you've not yet enjoyed a tour of NCAR led by Carlos, you have missed out. And those who've already been given a tour, I know we had a day earlier this year where a number of you got to visit and tour Blackfire Innovation down south here. This is the technological wonder at the heart of the 122-acre brand new Harry Reid Research and Technology Park, which was recently named by Clark County as the tech capital of the community. You know this already. You've enjoyed seeing one of the coolest university spaces that any of us have ever enjoyed. Best of all is the way that we've all partnered together in this Knowledge Fund. I'm wearing a purple tie today to represent our red and blue, north and south collaborations that we've enjoyed across the entire system, and you're going to get to hear a bit from all of us today. For example, DRI and UNLV have worked together, and you'll hear a little bit more about this, on UNLV's brand new incubator launched in the heart of the Hughes Center, the most prestigious business address arguably in Southern Nevada. Powered entirely by Blackstone and in partnership with dozens of companies. Blackstone is one of the world's largest tech startup investors. By sharing these programs, DRI and UNLV pool our commercialization ideas to provide an even larger array of positive impacts on our diversifying economy. Turning to Blackfire, I'm a fifth-generation Nevadan, so you shouldn't be embarrassed if you don't know this. I wonder if the legislators are aware of why it's called Blackfire. Did you know this? Blackfire is actually the state's official gemstone, the Blackfire opal. It's gorgeous. I had no idea, actually, until a few years ago when we launched this project. But similarly, glowingly, Blackfire is a buzzing, packed full, LEED certified $35 million building that was built without a single tax dollar from this legislature. And that's a fairly remarkable and unique thing that, as you know, is not often the way that we build state buildings, such as the investment that the private sector has supported this with. This is a building that would not exist without the Knowledge Fund, and we're building even more. We have 2 under construction right now, and we're launching the full 122-acre tech park as we speak. Designed to build an entire innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem that are often unidimensional state economy desperately needed, we have delivered north and south in a way that anyone who's walked through our hallways can attest. In these hallways, you will meet 107 companies. I wish I had the time to introduce you to them all. The vast majority of these are Nevada startups, from small student and faculty-led startups all the way up through tech unicorns. If that's a phrase you're unfamiliar with, this is an amazing story. We believe that in Southern Nevada, there are actually only 3 identifiable Southern Nevada tech unicorns. This is defined as companies that started in Southern Nevada that are now valued north of $1 billion. All of Vancouver has 3. Vancouver is a tech hub for all of Canada. As we stand here today, all 3 of Southern Nevada's tech unicorns now live at Blackfire. This includes our friends at Switch. Switch, of course, is very familiar to you all and powers our entire operations there. The second tech unicorn is Sightline. Sightline's a fintech company that famously was invested in by Bill Foley, who's not only the owner of the Golden Knights, he earned his money by being the fintech genius behind Fidelity back east in Boston, and brought that to Southern Nevada, investing not only in a hockey team, but in a fintech company of the future whose global headquarters now lives on a UNLV campus thanks to the Knowledge Fund. The third one is GeoComply, a cybersecurity and geofencing firm that keeps the internet safe and that was catapulted into importance during an increasingly online commerce world during the pandemic. GeoComply is actually particularly special to us and indeed to this historic legislature, as it's one of the very few tech unicorns in the world whose CEO happens to be female. Imagine being a UNLV engineering senior design winner who also happens to be female, and now having the opportunity to walk downstairs in a UNLV building to speak with CEO Anna Sainsbury, someone who has achieved what she dreams. Our executive in residence and former Las Vegas Mayor Jan Jones Blackhurst likes to say, if you can see it, you can be it. And at Blackfire, leveraging the most beautiful thing about our UNLV campus, which is our status, according to U.S. News and World Report, as the nation's most diverse university for, I believe, 7 of the past 8 years, we can see it and we can be it. In fact, one of our students, Brittany Martino, who graduated from a Knowledge Fund-sponsored program with 2 issued U.S. patents as an undergraduate, now serves under the CEO, Ms. Sainsbury, in a global technology firm headquartered in Nevada and at Blackfire. None of this was possible before the Knowledge Fund. Another startup at Blackfire is Airplate. Airplate is an African-American owned business. Listen to this. They've invented the world's first digital license plate. That phrase alone should inspire you to think about the ways in which we're driving a more diverse and robust economic future. We're going to think 10 years from now, it really was ridiculous that we used to hammer out numbers on tin and didn't take advantage of the smart technology that Airplate has invented. Chris Mitchell, its principal, was recently nominated as a top 10 finalist for Ernst & Young's National Innovator of the Year, and his offices are at Blackfire at UNLV, sponsored by the Knowledge Fund. Just down the hallway from Airplate's an artificial intelligence company called the AI Media Lab, whose story should inspire all of us who are looking to build a more robust economy where we keep our talent here. In the early 2010s, the AI Media Lab's principals graduated from UNLV and left for Silicon Valley because, of course, they did. That was the most reasonable thing to do if you were a tech graduate in the early 2010s. At the time, this was a reasonable choice. But prior to the Knowledge Fund, we did not have a Blackfire with its robust services, from business consulting to incubator services to accelerators. When Blackfire opened, though, these rebels came home. And this reverse brain drain is something we all should celebrate as Nevadans and protect by continuing to support the Knowledge Fund. All the while, these 107 black fire companies have one thing in common, and I'll close with this. They all express their profound gratitude to this legislature for supporting the Knowledge Fund, which in turn led to Blackfire and in turn led to all sorts of future innovations and companies that drive a diversifying Nevada economy. I'll close with these remarkable testimonials of gratitude from just 3 of our companies. Omer Satter, CEO of Sightline. We could have combined our offices into a single tech headquarters anywhere in the world after achieving our tech unicorn status. But Blackfire has proven to be the perfect place for us. It is a building filled with unparalleled innovation energy. Russ Logan, founder of the AI Media Lab. Blackfire brought us home. The relationships with UNLV and those they've partnered us with in the tech community have transformed our company into a powerhouse. And finally, Jan Jones Blackhurst. I know many of you know Jan well. Jan Jones now has her office at Blackfire as our executive in residence. In all my years in Nevada, I can promise you, neither you nor I have ever walked through a Nevada building as futuristic or as important to our future as Blackfire. As you're all aware, there are many companies that long lacked a serious Nevada presence. And as Karsten mentioned earlier, these are companies like Panasonic, LG, Adobe, giving us something to rival Park City Silicon Slopes, or even Research Triangle Park, which is, of course, the longtime home to our own UNLV president, Keith Whitfield, who long served on that Research Triangle Park's board, inspiring in turn the Harry Reid Research Park and Blackfire. In the Carolinas, this transformed a once unidimensional economy, a tobacco economy, into a dynamic region that hosts global innovation centers like those of BMW. This is what we've brought to the state, and this is what you're supporting when you support the Knowledge Fund. Thank you, and I know now we're going to hear from 2 of my good friends, Vic Adamazian and Carlos Cardillo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernhardt. It's always a pleasure to see you, and please go ahead when you're ready.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, I'm Dr. Vic Etchemizian, Vice President for Research at the Desert Research Institute, and I'm happy to be here today in support of GoEd's Knowledge Fund budget. I also would like to thank my colleagues, Mr. Carson Heiss and Dr. Bo Bernhardt, for making my job a little bit easier today by talking a little bit about the projects at DRI and also the collaborations that we have enjoyed with UNLV as well as with UNR. DRI is home to more than 450 scientists, engineers, and technicians with campuses in both Reno and Las Vegas. Our faculty conduct a wide variety of applied environmental research in atmospheric, earth and ecosystem, and hydrologic sciences. The overwhelming majority of our research is funded by the federal government through competitive grants and contracts. We are proud that while our work is global in scope, much of it is directly related to the lives of Nevadans. We have strong focus areas in water resources, climate research and adaptation, the nexus between environment and human health, wildfire prediction and impact assessment, air quality, water quality, sensitive and endangered species, and tribal archaeological resources. Our scientists are trained in scientific innovation and providing objective, reliable information to the public and decision makers. Our scientists have always been problem solvers, and increasingly their work is suitable for commercialization. I would like to provide several examples from past successes and a sample of current projects that hold great promise. As my colleague Karsten already mentioned, with Knowledge Fund support, WaterStart was launched in 2013 as a partnership between DRI, the Southern Nevada Water Authority, and the Governor's Office of Economic Development. WaterStart's mission is to accelerate the adoption of water technologies to meet the needs of water agencies and water users. Having facilitated over 45 pilot projects, WaterStart has since spun out of DRI and has continued to serve as an arena where the technologies related to water conservation and distribution systems can be tested, piloted, and implemented. The Syrinx PipeMinder is one such technology that has been implemented by the Las Vegas Valley Water District that allows the location and amelioration of high-frequency pressure fluctuations within the water distribution systems. What does that mean? This means that the cost of maintaining such systems that usually involves digging and replacing pipes is greatly reduced, and that reduces the cost to the consumer. Ecologics is another technology that detects leaks within the water distribution system through sound waves, allowing for targeted repairs and preventing maintenance. This not only reduces the cost to the consumer, but also preserves critical water resources for our state. 2Biomics is a spin-out company based on work that originated at DRI. Knowledge Fund support was used to extend research on white rot fungus, propagation in garlic fields to methods for fighting white rot in real agricultural settings. The successful commercialization of 2-biomics offers Nevada farmers a naturally derived fungicide to fight white rot in garlic and possibly other crops that are susceptible to fungal infections. My colleague Carson also mentioned the Healthy Nevada project. This was seeded with Knowledge Fund support. With over 60,000 participants in Nevada, the project continues to link genomic information with health outcomes based on medical records. The project boasts several high-profile successes pertaining to important health conditions such as high cholesterol, diabetes, and obesity. In the current biennium, Knowledge Fund resources are being used in part to support a commercialization fellowship, where a dozen scientists with ideas, or more than a dozen scientists with ideas, have promised to positively impact Nevadans are receiving training on how their concepts can be brought to market. Such as, Dr. Xiaoleng Wang is working on improving air quality measurements. These improvements could result in less expensive sensors that more precisely determine the nature and source of air pollution. This has important implications for rural Nevada, where exposure to smoke, dust, and smog is known only through an air quality sensor network that is extremely sparse by national standards. Dr. Eric Wilcox is working on a rooftop-mounted system that can forecast cloud movement on the scale of households and neighborhoods. For Nevadans with rooftop solar installations, this can help determine if it makes more sense at any given time to store energy in a battery or sell it back to the grid. Dr. Eric Bandala is working on improving biochar performance in water filtration applications. This can greatly reduce the cost of water treatment, making it more widely available for Nevadans with wells, tribal communities, and those living in rural areas of the developing world. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in Las Vegas that is Mr. Burns? Maybe you know. I don't know. Who's next?
Carsten Heise, for the record, there's no more in Las Vegas. We have Dr. Carlos Cadillo here from UNR.
Okay, thank
close
you.
it up.
Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Carlos Cardillo. I am the Executive Director of Corporate Partnerships at the Nevada Center for Applied Research, also known as NCAR at the University of Nevada, Reno. With investment from the Knowledge Fund, NCAR was created to support the development of companies, entrepreneurs, and jobs, and nurture the collaboration between industry, higher education, government, to make lives of all Nevadans better. NCAR serves as a portal for industry, allowing access to university resources and helping industry to establish relationships to promote innovative programs to address real-world problems and makes Nevada and Nevadans and the companies here globally competitive. Based on the indicators and return on investment that was presented to you for the Knowledge Fund project as a summary, I believe the Knowledge Fund has produced an impact in the region through research, development, and innovation. Our Knowledge Fund supported programs are providing early stage companies a place to park and develop their technology and products, access expensive equipment they cannot yet afford, and be able to hire our students, interns, and then later as employees. Besides the regular interaction with more than 200 companies and agencies, we have more than 66 companies with a presence on campus on a path to success that range from batteries, semiconductor, water sustainability, air purification, photocatalysis for clean roofs, aerospace biomanufacturing, antibody-based diagnosis and therapeutics, gene therapeutics for muscular dystrophy, disrupted material for extreme environment, and drones and aerospace, just to name a few. Through the Knowledge Fund, you're doing exactly what the White House has recommended, that is enabling innovation, capturing the talent pipeline, improving the business climate. The Knowledge Fund has planted the seeds for entrepreneurship, economic development, and job creations in the state. We have brilliant minds and amazing entrepreneurs in Nevada with their dynamic startups companies and inspired employees. And they are joining other Nevadans in setting up small and mid-sized businesses in our region. They are hiring Nevadans and paying them competitive nationally salaries. Through their employees base, they are investing back in our communities, in our restaurants, in our shops, grocery store, highways, and the K-12 education, also to name a few. These small and mid-sized companies are not looking for tax incentives or abatement. Yet, they are instrumental in the creation of stable, high-paying jobs and economic diversification, and they are helping in the workforce training by hiring students and interns, and they are hiring graduates in the high-tech jobs. That is what we call transformative and diversified economic development, creating a long-term sustainability. The creation of ongoing NCAR initiatives such as the Intelligent Mobility, the Biotechnology Incubator, the FAA UAS Test Site, the Wolfpack STEM Internship Program, and the upcoming Battery Life Cycle initiatives are key elements to our success. Today, thanks to the Knowledge Fund support, NCAR has helped more than small companies that started with 2 employees, and they grow up to 20, and in some cases, 60. And let me give you a couple of examples. Among the several companies that have scaled up through the NCAR, we have American Battery Technologies Company, ABTC, and they started with a few employees in a lab space on campus. Today, after successful investment rounds, they are more than 18 employees, and they are presently hiring more. This past October, President Joe Biden and Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm of the American Battery Material Initiative announced that ABTC is one of the 20 manufacturing and processing companies receiving grants award to support the continued development, production, processing, recycling, and manufacturing of battery material in the US. The federal government matched ABTC's $58 million commitment, making this a $116 million commitment with our state. More than half of their team are alumni from the UNR, and ABTC is now using several lab space at the Applied Research Facility on campus and continuing hiring personnel until they complete building their lithium-ion battery recycling pilot plant in Fernley, Nevada. Now let me share quick examples of faculty startups that are moving research into marketplace to benefit society and the economy. Ross Vivo Therapeutics is a company that targets disease with breakthrough therapies using microRNA. This state-of-the-art biotechnology development is happening in our campus and supported by the Knowledge Fund through NCAR. DX Discovery is a company that was developed by a couple of our outstanding microbiologists and is bringing new technology for rapid diagnosis of rare diseases to the world. We have the Intelligent Mobility Initiative, which is testing transportation technology in the real-world settings for Nevada streets. And main components for the intelligent mobility is to minimize and hopefully eliminate pedestrian death and at the intersections, contributing to better understanding near crash incidents and the study of intersection of vehicles to their setting and traffic signals. This is foundational for the future of autonomous travel. Another research team has developed amazing new ways to combine drones and robotics for the use on underground settings. In 2018, GOED asked the university to put forward a concept and implementation of a mine inspection robotics, a project that was backed by $400,000 of the Knowledge Fund. And in 2021, the University of Nevada, Reno faculty and students on a team called Cerberus competed with 8 international robotic teams to win the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, for Subterranean Challenge, and that was a $2 million prize money. This development for unmanned aerial and ground vehicles have implications to advance national security, underground mining operation, precision agriculture, delivery of medication, and other extreme environments. A final note, we at UNR are especially pleased to have partnered with the colleagues at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and create a business support program, the Sierra Accelerator for Growth and Entrepreneurship in both locations. The Knowledge Fund enabled all this to happen. Without the Knowledge Fund, we would not have more than 725 jobs created by our startups companies. Without the Knowledge Fund, these companies in Nevada would not have raised more than $200 million in venture capital. And without the Knowledge Fund, our graduates will be leaving the state in greater numbers, but now they are working for these startup companies in Nevada. The Knowledge Fund has been a game changer for Nevada, and your continued support of the Knowledge Fund will continue to make the difference for Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I think the rest of your slides aren't on your budget or aren't their staff closings. So we can go on to questions if you'd like. All right. Thank you very much. All right. We will start with Assemblywoman Brown May. Would you start, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the great presentation. It's nice to see you all here today, and we appreciate the detailed information. I have questions. Let's go back to budget account 1526. There are new positions that are addressed that increase the workload, Decision Unit E127 and E352. Right, I know we kind of went back to the beginning, right? If that's okay. Good, okay. So I'm just curious to know if you could talk a little bit about some of the measures that the agency considered in determining the additional economic activity that can be generated from this workload. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Are you identifying the business development manager or specifically?
Specifically, right. So you have the 2 full-time equivalent positions, 1 accounting tech position and 1 business development manager position. For the business development manager position in particular, how did you identify, what measure did you utilize to identify additional workload there?
Michelle Lynn, for the record. I'm going to let Bob Potts address that development. He's lead of that team. I do have some, for one example, I can give you the Board of Directors meetings have increased to every other month. And the partners, boots on the ground needs to be increased. We are out of balance for the South, and having 2 in the South and then 2 in the North will accommodate that, but I think he has more specific measurements. Thank you.
So for the record, Deputy Director Bob Potts. Michelle made it really easy for me because she kind of answered the question. What we want to do is move from quarterly meetings to every other month meetings, and in order to do that, think about an iceberg. There's all the board anybody sees is what's at the top. Huge amount of work goes in on the back end, getting everything up to speed on this, and trying to really accommodate the speed of this private sector. We really need another staff person, particularly in the South. So that's the biggest reason there is to expand the business development team.
Thank you. Follow-up, Chair? Thank you. If you don't mind, I just have one additional follow-up question. So the 2 new positions understand that there are measures to identify additional workloads. Specifically, one of the positions you've recommended begin July as opposed to October with the new state fiscal year. I'm curious to know, can you talk a little bit about what the justification is for the early start?
Yes, Michelle Lynn, for the record. That is an addition to the fiscal unit, and that's what I oversee. We need help now. We've had to call out 2 blackout time periods within our unit just to concentrate our effort and keep the agency moving. I always consider us as the chassis to the agency, and the chassis needs some support. So that's basically it in a nutshell. With all the programs coming in and the efforts being advanced and increased, the workload is also increasing, but that shows that we're growing. So good, positive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we will go to Senator Harris.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I know there was a discussion about making an attempt to support diverse businesses in the state. And I was wondering what the agency is doing to ensure that its own staff is diverse and reflects the state in order to aid in that mission.
So I think this, Bob Potts, for the record, I'm going to kind of turn that over to Michelle to answer that question. I think as far as diversity within an agency, we're probably one of the most diverse agencies that there is. So.
That's okay. Tom Burns for the record. Senator Harris, I don't have any statistics for you at this sitting. I'm happy to provide them to you in the future. I will say that as I'm my 17th day on the job, and so as I've engaged with the staff and introduced myself and make sure I've met the staff members that are available, I can tell you that we reflect the population of our state. I'm very proud of where we're at. I'm happy to supply that information for you. I apologize for not having it at this sitting.
Madam Chair, just a quick follow-up, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I want to be clear that I'm not looking for diversity metrics necessarily, but I would like to highlight that I think there should be a concerted effort in place. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen on its own. And so, if we are adopting a mission of trying to make sure we're helping diverse communities, I think it's very important that the agency itself also make a concerted effort to be diverse. Especially given, that there are new positions that are potentially coming open. So it's not I don't want to necessarily know where you're at now. I'd just like to make sure that is at the top of mind. Thank you.
And I can, Tom Burns for the record, and Senator Harris, I can tell you, I don't know whether it was intentional or not. Again, but I can tell you that that I'm very proud of. One, I'm very proud of every staff member I've met and their commitment to the state and their job. But I can also tell you that we reflect our community very well.
Thank you very much. I will go to Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is on SSBI. And so one of my first questions, it was talked about a little bit when about SETI, but I want to know, can you discuss the requirements to qualify for the funding related to the business enterprises owned and controlled socially by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals? In the conversation, you talked about the 3 tranches. There was also a conversation about how I believe a first amount will be issued this year. But it really wasn't a breakdown on the requirements. So can you add to that?
Most certainly, Carsten Heise for the record. So the state received not 1 wire from the federal government, it received 3 wires. The amount we got, about $35 million, was split into 3 portions. A capital portion, which is the bulk of it, and then about $6.7 million for very small businesses, less than 10, and $13 million for city businesses. So we are obligated that those $13 million can only be spent or invested or loaned to city businesses. So that said, just hold that thought for a minute. We also have the SETI incentive. And the SETI incentive is different for each state. It's calculated based on a complicated formula, but it's basically referring to the CDFI areas. If you have a large amount of areas within the state, your requirement goes up. So for Nevada, it's about 49%. So that's our target number. So all of our investments or credit transactions, if we hit 49%, then we, at a minimum, then we can start drawing down, or we would be eligible for the city incentive. So these are the sort of the 2 variables. You have a $13 million for the first tranche on SETI that we have to deploy just for SETI. And then for the incentive overall, if we hit 49%, then we can draw down within the second, as part of the second tranche, the incentive. I hope that helps.
Madam Chair, follow-up. So that is really good to explain that you have to hit the mark of 49%, but I think the second part to this question is access and outreach, because when I was reading the act that was reauthorized, it really delineated what is small business concern, right? And then it said it should be assumed that it's tribes, it's African Americans, it's Latinos, it's other, right? And veterans. And so that's a big deal when, in theory, when this dropped out. But I want to know the access and outreach that's happening in the South in order to build participation so that these small businesses that maybe fall under 10 employees or if within the capital needs of maybe less than 250,000, how are we going to find them, get them in the program, and allow them to participate in these loans?
That is a fair question, Carsten Heiser, for the record. So let me try to answer this with, a couple of components. First of all, as part of our substantial application, the U.S. Treasury required exactly what you were asking. How are you reaching those small businesses that are within underserved communities? This is our strategic framework to reach those. It's part of our application. I'm very happy to share that with you. And it outlines the sort of the tactic. What we are basically saying in here, and I'm not trying to be exclusive here and saying we are the only state, but when we went through the review process, our reviewer basically said, oh, this is fairly unique. Our approach is that we do what we call sort of soft targeting. And soft targeting and benchmarking our activities, exactly that's what you're asking for, Senator. And our argument is that the applications that come to us have to reflect the underlying population structure. So, and if they don't, then we have a shortfall. That's what we call with soft targeting. So so we are going to continuously monitor how our application intake looks like compared to the benchmark of population, how it should be, how the population is structured. And so that is, just the overall, approach that we are taking. Under that sit various strategies of what we call, which is in here, a structure of engagement and tactics that we use. Very specifically, I don't want to go into detail here, but they go into 6 categories: how to build relationships with these communities, how to position SSBCI in a welcoming light, how to maintain the presence in the community, how to partner with organizations and other agencies. So that's all. This is basically our roadmap, how we are going forward, how we are, tackling that, that requirement. On a more sort of practical level, I mentioned CDFIs before. They are, specific lenders into those communities. So we carved out, or we decided when we structured our program that a large proportion should be, for microloans, and through the microloan program, supporting the operation as well as the growth of community development financial institution in the state, because they would have the ability to reach into those communities. They are the lenders into those communities. They would provide technical assistance to those businesses. So we have a clear portion that is dedicated to that within our program structure. That said, I also mentioned technical assistance before. Technical assistance is a separate component of SSBCI, but the requirement from the feds is that it ties back to the main program. And here again, we're working with the small business development centers. They are on every corner of the state, can reach into those communities. One of our tactics is to embed them into minority chambers. So we are going to work very closely with chamber organizations. So this is on a tactical level. I hope that helps.
Thank you for that. So just to kind of wrap that up, I'm just going to follow this closely. There are several programs that already have businesses, such as Nevada Grow, have the micro businesses, have the second stage businesses, have the mix. I understand about the chambers and building that relationship, but it is something that we need to do well, because the 49% target is a big deal for communities that watched that legislation passed, watched it be reauthorized. And you can see from the initial 2012 or 2011 that there wasn't a lot of access under the initial Small Business Act that we've had. And now we have an opportunity because the incentive is mandating that work. So we're going to become friends. And then I'll lead to my second question, which is, what is the agency's progress in securing the $7.3 million incentive portion of the Small Business Credit Initiative for the 2.0?
This is Carsten Heiser for the record. Well, the progress is we have barely started. And the reason why this will take time is also reflected in the fact that Treasury is only paying out or starting to allocate the incentive portion from the second tranche. So it gives the states 3 years to create this track record, which forms the basis of the allocation. So the incentive portion will not be allocated in the first tranche. So that is just not possible. And that's for all states, not just for Nevada.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And next is Assemblyman Miller. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all. I have a question right here in the same area on page 15 of your presentation. So I noticed in the Battleborn Venture section under the application stats, it says there's 16% that are out of state. So I'm curious to know if we are actually investing in businesses that are out of state, or if that's just where the applications are coming from.
This is Carsten Heiser for the record. Yeah, the latter. Because the application, our intake of the applications are via website, so we cannot prevent anyone from accessing that. For the new iteration of the new website, we actually have a mechanism where we flag up, if you are eligible or not, and out of state, address is obviously not being eligible. So we are certainly not investing in them. We were actually, I was debating whether I should include this or not. In some reporting, I actually take it out and just pro rata increase, the other portions within the state. But to be transparent, we left it in there, but we are certainly not investing in out of state.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate seeing it. It was I just wanted to make sure that we were not actually investing our money, our state's money, into companies outside of our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll go to Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm very excited when I listened to your presentation about the amazing things that we're doing with all of the budget areas and the programs and the innovation and companies coming. It's thrilling to see, and it's what we've all wanted for our beautiful state of Nevada. There was an area you touched on with workforce development, and I'm just curious because I hear this in many different venues. We have the universities working on workforce development. We have the chambers working on workforce development. We have cities, counties. We have the governor's office. Is there, or would you consider yourself a central location to try and coordinate all these efforts? Is anybody doing that? How do we, develop efficiencies in this great, thrust we're all doing for this now? And just wondering how the coordination is with all the different businesses and institutions.
Michelle Lynn, for the record, we're going to let our subject matter expert, Stacey Bostwick, take that question.
Thank you. Stacey Bostwick for the record. Assemblywoman Kasama, through you, Chair. GoEd plays an integral role in the coordination of workforce development as it relates to economic development. So I always like to use the expression that we're laser focused in our space, but we need to be a part of a coherent and coordinated workforce system. a lot of our stakeholders and partners look to us in terms of research and strategy. And they look to us to coordinate, to your question, with the new and emerging industries and jobs that are coming in relation to our work in economic development. So we play kind of that bridge or connecting role, but we try to maintain focus in our space because there are, to your point, a lot of folks who are interested and invested in workforce development. And we aren't the expert and won't pretend to be in spaces that are outside of economic development. But there is a lot of work in coordination and partnership. So we're not an island. We participate in many cross-system integration efforts, but we are, and I'll defer to Director Burns on this particular aspect, but I will say that we see ourselves as a really important piece of the puzzle, but not necessarily as the coordinating aspect for the entire workforce ecosystem.
Madam Chair, if I may follow up. Yes, Assemblywoman. So our focus is fairly narrow. It is to deal with our incoming partners and be able to provide the skills for Nevadans as they come in so that they have a workforce that meets their needs and continues to have them there. And so our goal through Stacy's leadership is to meet those needs.
Thank you. Thank you again for the presentation.
Thank you very much, and we'll go to Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one general question and then one specific to a budget, or two specific to a budget, if I may. So my first question, I brought this up in a meeting I've had with one of your regional partners, looking at some of the criteria for working with your offices, and looking at the changing economy, workforce economy in particular, right? What are our employees looking for in a job? Where do they want to go and land? What's important to them? And I think that we have really two divergent thoughts out there among the working population. And one of them is the kind of traditional, we want security, we want to feel, like our job matters, but really looking for those baseline securities. But then we have this other divergent side that is looking for flexibility, support, the ability to be home with their families more often. We're seeing more frequently across the country, the entire world, actually, the entire world, a movement towards less working time in the office, more flexibility for family leave, paid leave. What are we doing to set kind of a standard for the workforce to capture those folks who are not on the traditional route, and even those who are? Because in some cases, we're not even seeing the baseline security metrics being met in our workforce or in our potential job markets. So what is your office doing to address kind of this divergence in the economy of workforce?
Sure. Thank you, Assemblywoman Tom Burns, for the record. Our recruitments go over kind of a vast array and really address a new economy in a lot of ways. So we've talked about manufacturing, and certainly they don't lend themselves to work from home conversations in many ways. But that we're also always in talk with technology companies that are more innovative as far as developing. I'll go back just to technology in general, but things. Gaming technology, games as they resort, and those lend themselves to those conversations a little more. And so some of that will be, that your question will be addressed in the nature of those conversations that are, nature of those businesses that we have coming to Nevada and that we talk about recruiting. Candidly, some of those things are left to the free market, right? I mean, people speak with their feet and with their wallet. And I think just in general, those industry segments are going to address those things on their own, whether they're in Nevada or in other places. They need to address those things on their own in order to draw qualified talent.
Yeah, I understand the theory of that. It's just I haven't seen it in Northern Nevada, at least, unless it's entrepreneurial development. We've seen a lot of folks go into innovative entrepreneurial workforce where they're designing their own careers. Sure. And that's great, but then when you have these industries coming in that we're right, the state is incentivizing them to come in and they can't find the workforce because we didn't tell them, by the way, our workforce desires X, Y, and Z. What are you doing to meet those needs? I feel like we haven't done our service to both the industry and the potential employees in the state. So I think we have work we can do in that area, and I hope that your office is moving forward and looking at how to address those needs. All right, my second question has to do with Budget 1531, if that's all right. Yeah, thank you so much. When we're talking about the workforce innovation grants, can you talk about whether states and community college programs would require additional funding in future biennia upon receipt of the workforce innovation or workforce inventive grants?
If I may, Madam Chair, thank you, Madam Assemblywoman Tom Burns. For the record, I'm going to defer this question to Stacy Postwick. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters. So there's two enhancements that are listed for the budget 1531, and so the enhancement 125 is the traditional funding for the WIN fund. That's what we use to the traditional model of developing or expanding workforce development programs. That's that kind of longitudinal history that we've had since about 2016, where we've made $13 million right in investments in those programs. I believe your question, though, is actually about enhancement 127 because of that descriptor with the workforce incentive grant. That's the enhancement that came to us through NSHE. The way that was built was a one-shot, and so the intent with that 24 million is to kind of do a short-term burst for capacity building, and that those programs would be self-sustaining going forward, so they would not be asking for funding in future biennia.
Thank you so much for that answer. That helps clarify for me. And I have one more question on this same budget, if that's all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we talk about how the recommended grant allocation differs from the traditional model used by the agency to identify eligible workforce development projects?
This is Stacy Bostrick for the record. Assemblywoman Peters, thank you for the question. I might ask you to clarify, but I think what you're asking is how does the additional 24 million one-shot enhancement differ from the traditional WIN funding process? Could you please clarify? I just want to answer your question accurately. Thank you.
So it sounds like from staff notes that the current grant parameters or the historic grant parameters, those that are in statute, are not meeting the need for the workforce training programs and for some of the areas that you would like to expand the program to. Can you talk a little bit about how you're trying to meet those needs through the grant allocation recommendations? Like maybe I confused it more than
It's okay, Stacy Bostrick for the record. So I think that the existing statute for the WIN fund works as designed. There is a request that we have that is separate, of course, from this hearing that is a non-reversion, but that's really not, I think, what you're referring to. I think the difference, and one of the things that we have noted because this enhancement came over from NSHE, is that there are some programs that aren't traditionally aligned to economic development priorities. So that's an ongoing conversation that we need to have. I shared in my brief notes that traditionally we have funded programs in 5 target sectors because those are aligned to the new or emerging jobs that are happening in relation to economic development. So that's really kind of where we need to focus these investments, because a lot of times we're going from no skilled training programs to needing those in order to develop a talent pipeline. I think some of the differences that might be coming in from the NSHE request are going to be in areas that we don't traditionally fund or maybe are not aligned to our state plan. So we need to reconcile that, and that's a piece of the process that we're working on.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Vice Chair Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm sorry, I'd like to go back to Budget 1521. In looking at our backup documents, and I know there's been conversations between the Governor's Office of Finance and our fiscal division staff here, it appears that there's going to need to be a budget amendment that will address the allocation of that second $35.2 million distribution for FY25. It seems like between Program 1 and Program 2, they're in the governor's recommended budget, it didn't list out the distinction about those special use categories or revenue generating ledgers. Can you tell us the timing of that budget amendment when we're going to get that?
Thank you for the question, through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Sorry about that. Yes, we do have a potential budget amendment request in with the GFO, and we are working for them. However, nothing has been finalized, and you are seeing a potential need of reallocation to the transparency of this budget program. We had originally received that allocation in not fully understanding how to allocate it appropriately, and through the adjusted base phase of our budget building, it became very clear very quickly. So I've made it identified to both GFO and to LCB, and we are working on that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll go to Senator Gansard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today. I appreciate the success of the programs, both in the north and the south, and the work from Dr. Cardillo and also Dr. Bernhardt. So, and Karsten, I see, who's been working so long on this. And so I have a couple of questions. You know, one is the WIN funding, kind of circling back to that. And right now it is supposed to be aligned with the state plan, but I do appreciate that the money's been put over in GoEd, because that should help align with education. And when you say it's going to be outside the parameters of the state plan, and also what was mentioned is that those dollars are going to be spent more on personnel and equipment, but not on actual funding, not like grants to individual companies. So my question is around those partnerships, and what are you expecting them, the university system, to try to use that would be outside of the state plan?
Thank you for the question, Michelle Lynn, for the record. Let's pass that off, if you're all right with that, to Stacy Bostwick, please.
Thank you. Stacy Bostwick for the record. Thank you for the question, Senator Gansert. I think what I want to express is that we want to stay laser focused on the initiatives that are outlined. So in part of the backup that we've provided is, we've identified nearly $20 million in projects that we already see as part of the pipeline in terms of need. And those needs are developing new programs or expanding capacity. So what we got from the NSHE enhancement was some additional priorities that they're experiencing. And so we really need to dig in with them on those issues and determine if we can reconcile, and I believe we will very easily be able to identify those priorities and how they align to our state plan. There are just a couple of areas that may not work and are better suited to be funded in other ways. I don't want to necessarily say there are projects we wouldn't fund. I think it's a conversation that we need to have. And I think the thing to anchor this idea is that you had mentioned partnerships. The WIN Fund requires that we essentially have business sponsors to say we're not just developing a program because we think there's a need. There's an actual need. There's private industry buy-in in terms of program design, right? So that we're meeting the skills needed by those industry. And so we want to make sure that that is also happening in terms of collaboration.
Thank you, and I appreciate sticking to the state plan, because it's been thoughtfully put together, and I know those jobs should be higher paying and more needed now and in the future when you look at that investment. And I actually wanted to move over for a moment to the tranche of funding, and the federal government, the 35.2, the Battleborn, that's going to be in Battleborn. And you mentioned that there's a partnership you do partner with the SBDCs, and I know banks are required to follow the Community Reinvestment Act, the CRA, and which requires them, it's funding, it's hours, it's all sorts of things to underserved populations or areas. And so the SBDCs are typically pretty closely tied to some banks, right? Because they have to do the SBA loans and things like that. So are you working in concert with SBDCs, and are they also looking at banks who are required to and need to find projects that fall within the CRA Investment Act, which is a federal program or federal requirement?
Ms. Kassenheiser, for the record, yes. Yes to all of the above. So the SBDC, we are mainly working with them through our Technical Assistance Initiative. But as you may recall, Senator, we in SBCI 1.0, we already contracted with the SBDC at that time because they were in our venture capital portion our partner. So over the years, we have established a strong relationship with them. With respect to CIA, what I need to be clear is that when I talked about lenders, predominantly, the SSBCI program is for smaller regional banks or CDFIs as partners. So this is not a program that will be taken up by Bank of America or Wells Fargo. But those banks we encourage to engage through CIA credits that they can obtain through the federal program to strengthen CDFIs. So indirectly through our microloan program, which is trying to build out the CDFI presence as well as the formation of CDFIs within the state, of which we are lacking a few. Through the CIA program, we can support those, or the banks can support those.
Thank you. And just the last question I have around the 35, the tranches that you said we're not going to be able to use, and many other states aren't going to be able to use. Do you have a cap like on admin? Are you being held back by personnel or being able to roll it out, or how can we help with those efforts to make sure that that money gets spent? I think at least the 80% level.
Yeah, thank you for the questions, Kassenheiser, for the record. So. There is an administration budget attached to the SSBCI allocation. It's 5% of the total for the first tranche, and then it goes down to 3% for the subsequent two tranches, the second and third tranche. We are stretched. This is calculated really up to onto the last nickel and dime, I would say, and this is why. Through the legacy funds that we have under SSBCI 1.0, we have to support the program. We cannot just support the program without just with the current administration dollars that we have. No state can do that. The program is just too complex. We believe we have the funds to support the program into certainly the next decade for the duration. And there's a portion of the of revenue generation as well. So part of the programs that we are running can generate revenue. Others not so much. Others do. But it will take time to kick in. Once it kicks in, it will be a revenue source for the program.
Thank you. I appreciate your efforts because that's quite a bit of money that's coming to the state of Nevada. We want to maximize the use, but with federal dollars, there's a lot of strings, so we understand that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll go to Assemblywoman Hadegui.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to just ask some questions on Budget 1531, Decision Unit E127, so the Office of Workforce Innovation. And I just had a couple quick questions, if I might. The first one is, as we were going through the governor's recommended budget, it looks like some of the recommendations for this grant might not align with our statutes. So NRS 231141 through NRS 231.152 kind of delineate how these funds within workforce innovation for New Nevada can be spent. So do you have any timelines as to when that BDR. I'm assuming there will be a BDR is going to be introduced, and
This is Stacy Bostwick. For the record, thank you for the question. I think I answered a similar question. I don't believe the existing statute limits our ability to fund workforce development initiatives that are aligned to economic development. I don't want to speak for Director Burns or the governor's office, but the intent of bringing in these funds through E127 was to ensure that they were deployed aligned with economic development priorities and aligned to the state plan. So in that respect, we don't anticipate a need to change the BDR. What I will say in terms of an existing bill that we have in place is that we are entertaining a request or inserting a request to get rid of our reversion. And that is a really important piece in terms of deploying funds beyond the biennium. In terms of developing new workforce development training programs, getting the work of coordination, development, and execution and spending all done within, sometimes a less than 24-month period is a Herculean task. We have amazing partners in the post-secondary education space, but that's incredibly difficult. So if you look at the task in front of you, and especially if you look at Enhancement 127, the 5 institutions put forward initial budgets based on some areas that they've been highlighting in terms of need for capacity. They may not have looked at it from the same economic development lens that GoEd does. So that's a conversation we want to make sure our priorities are aligned. But they did look at them in terms of like, what can we do realistically and quickly? It's a heavy lift to put that much money out in such a short amount of time. So the non-reversion would also help I think in terms of those projects, just to make sure that we're setting them up for success. That's the biggest piece of this, is ensuring that these programs have the ability to sustain once the one-shot funding does go away.
thank you. And if I could, a follow-up in the same area, Chair? Okay, and I know that some of the grant programs with the state and community colleges are new. So can you kind of walk me through what the GoEd's involvement's going to be in overseeing and administering these grants?
Stacy Bosser, again, for the record, thank you for the question. GoEd plays a pretty active role in terms of coordinating a partnership. The way that we typically administer our WIN fund requires private industry, seats at the table, along with our higher education partners. Our higher education partners have 99% of the work. So in terms of breaking down barriers, GoEd plays a part of that, but they have the work of designing a program, building a budget. But our role is oversight and reporting and ensuring compliance, of course, with this statute.
Thank you very much, and we'll go to Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Am I back in the assembly again?
I'm sorry, Senator.
That's okay. I'll go back and forth between the houses.
Just a moment lapse there for a minute.
No, that's okay. This is kind of a general question. I know that all of us here in the legislature, all the legislators, received a report about the top 10 employers in our state with the largest number of employees on Medicaid. Obviously, and I know some of us, including myself, actually reached out to find out how many of those top 10 employers also received tax abatements or other incentives, that. And there was an overwhelmingly number of overlap between that. So how are you addressing that impact of those top 10 employers with employees on Medicaid having been recipients of tax abatements or incentives?
Thank you, Senator. Tom Burns for the record. This point's well taken. And we've addressed this and done some research on our end. Part of the requirement in receiving the abatement is having health insurance that meets ACA standards and is paid at least 65% by the employer. That being said, employers can't force an employee to take their health insurance, and so I'll give you an illustration because I was one of these knuckleheads at one point in my life. You could still argue I am a knucklehead, but it was just a different type. In my 20s, look, you were taking away my beer and pizza money, right? If I had to pay for health insurance, and I was invincible. And so if you use the illustration of an employee that has that mentality, and I understand that at some level, whether I agree with it or not, they choose not to participate. And at that point, if getting in the process of needing health care, they can still go back and apply for Medicaid. Also under the ACA Act, if you're not a full-time employee, meaning that you don't work at least 30 hours a week, you're not eligible for health care. That's a federal mandate. And again, if you don't have full-time employment and you need health care, you do fall under the Medicaid. So again, we do follow up with those that are searching out abatements for the qualification or the mandate that you have health insurance and it qualifies at 65% level. I think you'll also note that on that same list, you'll note that the state of Nevada and a lot of our counties also fall on that health list for, I would argue, roughly the same reasons.
Chair, may I follow up? I guess this is kind of following up with Assemblywoman from District 24. I mean, given that, is this anecdotal evidence that people are like, rejecting the health insurance benefits? Do we have any metrics that are like following up? Do we have any follow-up on that? For example, in addition to those minimum salaries and like you had indicated initially, in order to get some of those abatements or incentives, they have to show that they are going to provide those. But do we have any follow-up on those to find out what they are? Because obviously we're seeing them come back in the Medicaid where we're having to fund them. And do we assess any other needs, or do we have any metrics, if anything, in addition to salary and healthcare, but like paid leave or other working conditions? I have concerns. You mentioned the market would correct this, like naturally itself, but I feel like we have a duty and a responsibility to ensure that we aren't giving away Nevada taxpayer dollars only to have to cover these same Nevadans through Medicaid coverage.
Madam Assemblyman Tom Burns, for the record. Again, part of our process is an audit at 2 years and 5 years, and that process, and that's from an independent. Actually, I correct myself. It's from the Department of Taxation. They go out and review the wage benefits as well as the health care requirements and make sure that those items are being offered. Again, at a 65, paying for a 65% is above industry standard in most cases. I come from the insurance background prior to here. In many cases, the requirement was only 50%, so we have raised the bar at that level. Again, I'll go back to the two exceptions to that. One is, you can't force people to take the health insurance, and two, even under the federal mandate, you have to work a 30-hour week. And so part-time folks, people that have less than that employment experience don't qualify for health insurance.
Thank you very much. Senator. We will go to Senator Neal, and then I'll go to Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a question, I believe, for Stacy Bostic. It could be for the director, too. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the workforce alignment piece. And I want to know, are you guys at least having the conversation internally about how strategically you can align with the workforce needs, have go-in align with the business needs, well, the state offices that we actually have vacancies? Because I think we need to start prioritizing what we need to do. We have a lot of state agency vacancies, but I don't see the workforce dollars from local to go-in being tied to the training needs of those agencies, number one. Number two, I actually like the expansion of the, I guess, the categories for INCHI, but they also need to be aligned with businesses who are hiring. And I didn't see those categories like architecture, agriculture. Like, I don't see how in an urban community such as CSN, how those necessarily fall into the needs of what I'm hearing, right? I'm hearing a lot around science, which you have, but it's more like biology. It's more like I want to be a doctor, but no one's talking to me about that. I want to go to Boyd Law. No one's talking to me about law school and trying to help me get into any of the, maybe the pre-law or paralegal or any of the things that actually establish that student population to move forward. When we talk about business accounting, I distinctly remember there was an accounting company that was, it was a large accounting company that was literally looking for people to hire, and there was no conversation between the GOIN or some of the larger, I guess, workforce entities to even dial down into the deeper layers of what's going on in communities. And so I want to know, how are we going to reprioritize so we can focus on age groups and do the deep data look on what we really need to do?
I guess I'll jump in. This is Stacy Bostwick for the record. Thank you for the question. In terms of the WIN fund, we have typically used that for primary economic development purposes, right? So those folks those industries who are generating economic growth and who are not experiencing. We have not historically utilized that fund to support public service employment. So we're trying to, I guess, be cautious and I'll take feedback on that. But we're trying to be cautious in terms of using the general fund to then kind of go back and incentivize public employment. But that being said, I wanted to take a second, Senator Neal, to say that with the WIN fund, we have tried to focus on, I kind of say there's three specific buckets. One is, do we have a program that's available, right? So to your point, if we have an accounting company who's trying to hire a certain kind of investigative accountant, but we don't have a program that provides those skills, we have a gap, in our training infrastructure. So availability. Capacity is the second bucket. So I think you hear capacity quite a bit when we talk about educators or nurses, right? We have really great programs in the state of Nevada, but we need more slots and to put out more individuals with those skills. And the third bucket is kind of, and you see this a little bit in terms of the capacity building enhancement from INCHI, but is staying on top of how the market and how the job needs are changing. And so that really is the focus of what we try to accomplish with the WIN fund. That being said, as a part of their application process, and part of what we try to kind of clearly outline as part of a project is the work that you're referring to. How do you dig deep and identify individuals who are appropriate? How do you work with employers to directly connect these programs and these skills to jobs that are actually happening here? We do that as part of our Workforce Diversity Action Plan, but we also do that as part of the program design for those. So I probably could be accused of getting into the weeds too much in terms of that application process, but those are really vital to your point. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I have just a quick follow-up?
Surely.
So maybe it didn't come out right because I have like 5 things going on in my head right now. But when I looked at the historical deviation of what you guys are doing and the INCHI, I guess, dollars in order to create programs at the institutions, that is what I meant by, why can't you use those dollars to create programs at the institutions that will then feed into the positions at the state agencies. Unless there's some kind of rule about recycling dollars, because technically it's going to the citizen that will then participate, right? So if there's a barrier, I would love to know that, but it just seems to make sense that if we're going to do this for a biennia, then why not put dollars in the in-she programs that's actually going to feed the need for the state agency so that the programmatic structure that they're going to invest in will feed the business accountant that they need at B&I. It will feed the admin assistant that they need at NDOC. Like, those are real things, but we're not training for that. We're not even talking about it actually within the workforce communities. And I participate in those workforce conversations a lot. I have Project 354. We can't even have a conversation about vacancies and how to put young people into those positions, or even a training cohort that exists in any function or place in the South. That's what I think we need to be doing. And so I'll leave that alone.
I think that was a statement, not a comment.
It was.
Okay, just checking. Just checking, Senator, to make sure I didn't miss it. All right, we will go to Senator Titus, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question, and thank all of you at the table, both here in the North and in the South, for all the good projects that you're doing for Nevada's economy. My question is about the knowledge account. And Director Burns, when you came to the table and you just opened up your comment by saying you like spending other people's money. And I would just point out that we're here representing those other people, the general fund or the taxpayers of Nevada. And so to that end, looking at that knowledge account, there's $41.5 million in general funds that have been appropriated to the knowledge account. So those are taxpayers' dollars. In that comments that were made regarding the Knowledge Fund, it is partly to support commercialization and technology transfer to the private sector. Then looking at our notes along that, so there's some revenues that are through that commercialization. There are revenues that have been gained or made through those monies. And apparently, at first it was $1.5 million, and it's going to be allocated back to the research institutes. Could you clarify that for me?
For the specific questions, I'm going to allow my Karsten Heinz to address those. If I misspoke at the beginning, I want to clarify my statement. I believe I said I wanted that we're going to discuss how we spend the people's money, and I take that obligation very seriously and don't make light of that. But I will pass on the future for Karsten.
Thank you for the question, Senator. This is Carsten Heise for the record. First of all, if I may correct, the total cumulative allocation of knowledge fund is $37.5 million. Yes, since inception. So I wish we had 42 million allocated, but it's 37.5, 10, 10, 10, 2.5, and 5 over until 2021 session, from 2013. To your fair question about commercialization revenue, because it comes up nearly in every hearing, I looked at the statute again yesterday, and I did a search for commercialization revenue. So what the statute does, it provides the basis and defines it, what it is, and accounts for the fact that it could occur, and it probably very likely will occur, and then how we deal with it. It is not necessarily an objective in itself. Under the section of powers and duties of the executive director, which, enhancement of transfer and commercialization of research, it states that enhanced technology transfer and commercialization of research to create high-quality jobs in new industries in the state, which is, I think, what we demonstrate today. We're taking intellectual property that's been developed either under the Knowledge Fund projects or at the universities, and then through Knowledge Fund projects, link it to the private sector for the benefit. So we are providing, we are certainly fulfilling this requirement. Should commercialization revenue occur, and it will over time, then there's a mechanism how to deal with it. And I don't want to use this as an excuse. And I take your point, and it is an absolutely fair point. When you are mentioning it goes back to the institution, this is because there is an entry policy and an entry requirement that is very generous. And allocates 60% of revenue from intellectual property generation that is being commercialized to the inventor. It is something that I, relatively naive in 2012 when I started work at GoEd, tried to tackle and bring it more in line with the sort of real world. For example, Stanford has it a third, so have others. So lower this because there is research out there that demonstrated that this incentive, although looking at this, you pay more to the inventor, so the inventor should be incentivized to create more commercializable intellectual property. It is not really working. There's evidence of that does not work. So we need to bring this back in line. So the question that you are asking is, why does this flow back? Well, because we have to. So it is under the current NG rules, and I actually have them with me in here. And it's to the detriment of, first of all, the Knowledge Fund receives less, because when you actually calculate this through, it will only be 1/6 that the Knowledge Fund will receive. It's also to the detriment of the research institutions' ability to form effective technology transfer offices, and we went through this through our objectives of the state plan to actually improve the tech transfer system. If those funds do not go back, how do you fund this? Because they are by definition, not by definition, but by and large, nationwide tech transfer offices are loss-making. So I'm giving you a lot of response to a very valid question, and I hope you can use some of that.
Follow up on that, Madam Chair? So just real briefly, thank you for that. But my point of the question is really about transparency and NCHI's budget. And so if at some point through commercialization, there is some money that go back to these institutions, we want to make sure that this body has the ability to see that number, and so it's not hidden somewhere in the NCHI's budget, that we want to make sure, 'cause it's been an issue in the past when we talk about budgets, where's your extra money, and where is some of this money that you may have made, and so just making sure that we have some transparency and that this body's involved in that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Assemblyman Watts and then Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd just like to congratulate you on the new strategy. I think it makes a lot of sense, the areas that you're focusing in, again, addressing some of the challenges that our state faces, but also seizing on some of those opportunities and unique strategic advantages that we have. I did want to follow up a little bit on some of the things that were brought up by my colleague from Senate District 3 around the abatement program. And I hear you when you're discussing the language that exists in statute, and that's really kind of the guidelines. I guess kind of to the point that that was being brought up before, understand that there are some folks that are working part-time and that this isn't necessarily covered in statute, but are those positions part-time by choice? And would folks like to have full-time work and the benefits that come with that? But the piece that I really wanted to kind of get back to is the difference between the statutory direction and the agency discretion when it comes to some of these programs. One of the things that I think you brought up early on in the presentation is that you're looking at the Hockman Index for the state overall, but that there's also some regional variation. Obviously, with TRIC and other things, been some highly successful efforts at diversifying the economy up here in the Northwest, although that's come with some challenges I think others have noted. And, you know, being from Southern Nevada, I'm particularly interested in how we really focus on some of those economic development efforts in Southern Nevada. My understanding is that under kind of the current statutory framework for the abatements, there's not a lot of discretion to allow the agency to focus some of those efforts specifically towards Southern Nevada, which in my mind is kind of where we need to look at going forward. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that, and do you feel that, again, I know that you're operating under the current statutory framework, but does that make sense? Does that give the agency enough discretion as we look at also trying to streamline the timelines to make some of these decisions and get them through? Does this give you enough discretion to prioritize diversification efforts where you think they're going to be the most strategic and most beneficial?
For the record, Bob Potts, I really appreciate your question, and there's a lot of background that goes into that question that I could elaborate on. First of all, on the abatements, yeah, they're very, very prescriptive. I mean, they're statutory, which on the one hand is really great because it keeps us from picking winners and losers, right? And so you follow the line, you walk the line, and that's how it works. And if you don't like it, you go back to the legislature, you change the statute, and then we think about this all going forward again. On the ability to be discretionary. So take, for instance, what my colleague Stacy was talking about. The Wind Fund is a huge support system as discretionary to help companies as kind of a deal closing fund when you can't find the available workforce, right? So you can put together a training program that's specific to the company, but you put together materials capacity for workforce training that can be replicated to other companies that are looking for the same kind of staff. So that's just an example of a huge win for us going forward. I would suggest, in the bigger scheme of things, when we think about economic development and why do companies choose to expand or relocate, and how do you strategically try to guide the right kind of industry that creates really great jobs, that creates a great future, that raises the level for everything, where you can finally get to a place where educational outcomes is demand-driven instead of supply-driven, I think that should be a goal that we should be shooting for, right? If I go through that list, and I think particularly like you're talking about Southern Nevada, we have a hood on the car, or hood ornament on the car of what's happened up in the north, the things that we can do, right? We have as bigger population center to the west of us in Southern Nevada than we do to the west of us in Northern Nevada that we could operationalize, that we could think about. But you have to have a place for companies to land. You have to have not only the land, you've got to have the right infrastructure in place to support it, whether you're talking about rail, whether you're talking about multimodal facilities, there's a whole host of things that are more of a priority to companies than abatements, right? So if we could think and focus on these things at a high level, how do we get land? How do we meet what companies are looking for when they think about permitting, when they think about land, when they think about cost of energy, when they think about available workforce? To Senator Neal's comments earlier on, I wanted to jump in and talk about, we really try to focus on what kind of workforce development we need that meet economic development priorities, and what Stacy, my colleague Stacy, has talked about at some degree too. If you look at what matters to companies, workforce is always at the top of the list. If we put together the right workforce training, education, create the right WIN programs, do those kind of things, we are going to have a much bigger impact as far as attracting the right companies than we have with a better abatement, in my mind. So let's think about how do we operationalize those kind of things. So that's me.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Potts. I appreciate that, and I just hope that's something that that we can continue to have a conversation about, and I hope that's a conversation that my colleagues continue to have as we consider the various economic development initiatives that we have, because I think it's important when we've discussed some of those abatement programs as something that is additive, but I think it's helpful to keep in mind what are those top priorities that actually get people to choose to locate in Nevada and in different regions. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't have a question, but more of a statement, but some questions for you offline, because I know we're running low on time. With budget 1531, it's a new workforce incentive grant, and I'd like to know what the application process is. There was a question asked earlier from one of my colleagues concerning NRS 231.141, and there seems to be a difference of opinion, so I'd like to have a conversation with you on that, because I think there is some limited authority there for you. But there's also, I have a question with the $20 million one-time funding, and why that's not just put into the budget and a one-time funding. When you look at the identified requests, it only comes to $7.5 million that for some grants. So I have a lot of questions. Can we talk offline? But at least you know what my questions will be, and I don't take up a lot of time today.
We'd be happy to meet with you, Assemblywoman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last, we will go to Assemblywoman Anderson, and then we'll close the budget hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is a long microphone. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It was nice hearing it a second time or something similar to it. So I've already voiced one of my concerns to you. And I know that we've already set up a time that we get it, or we are in the process of setting up a time to talk about that infrastructure and how we can help the Northern Nevada area. I think that my colleague from Clark County brought it up very well, that there are regional concerns. I do have, however, a general question that is actually not related to my area. It is related to slide 10 that I believe Mr. Potts brought forward, and slide 10 as well as slide 11. And it kind of has to do with the infrastructure and the quality of life, which again relates to my other issue. Are there considerations of neighboring counties, number one, when there are items that are being considered? And then number two, you mentioned on slide 11 the airports, which I know that's really outside, so I will take my cue from Vice Chair Monroe Moreno, and we can discuss this later if you like. But I'm just wondering if there's a way to do, a way to help our airports that are not in the two metropolitan areas. So that way they get a little slice of the pie, so to say. If it is in Carson City, I know that we've got smaller airports around our state, and many times they are ignored. So I'm just wondering if GOED has had any discussions with those smaller airports. And again, we can do that discussion offline. And then quality of life, what exactly are the items you consider when it comes to quality of life?
So I think, Bob Potts for the record, so on the airport side of things, we can have an offline discussion because we are involved in that space. Or I would ask my colleague Chris Sanchez in the South to talk about that if he has anything he wants to add. But first I'll talk about the quality of life element. You know, I talked earlier about this list that matters to companies. Quality of life is on that list too, and how do you think about that? And for us, there's no way a staff of 41 FTEs can handle all of the issues that go along with economic development and economic growth in the state and all the different regionals. So we have to work with our regional development authority partners, and we work very closely with them. We also work very closely with the chambers and a whole host of folks that Director Burns talked about on one of his earlier slides. But we also are heavily engaged with the whole housing side of things. So you need to think about, when you talk about quality of life, you need to think about the big ticket items like housing and what are we talking about, transportation and all of that. We're engaged in all of those conversations as we move forward with the company that's thinking about coming up for abatement. Like I mentioned before, it's the whole iceberg, right? You just see the tip. These are all the conversations that happen underneath. We think about reciprocal licensing of contractor licenses. I'd love to see something like that happen so we could support some of our rural communities by bringing in builders from Idaho or Utah or where we could get, where we don't have enough enough builders to do things like that. These are conversations that we're regularly involved in and want to help support moving forward. So hope that answers that question. And then I would turn it over to Mr. Sanchez if he wants to talk a little bit about airports.
Thank you, Bob. Christopher Sanchez, Deputy Director for Southern Nevada, for the record. Assemblywoman Anderson, thanks for the question. Absolutely look forward to talking to you perhaps another time given the time constraints today, but we are very much looking at our rural airports and the entire ecosystem around the movement of both passengers and freight in our two primary markets as well. So happy to follow up with you in the near future.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions. I look forward to our continued discussions, and if the Chair would like, I'm more than happy to follow up with the rest of the committee as well with whatever we discuss.
That would be great.
Thank
you. All right. With that, I think we will close this budget hearing. Mr. Burns, do you have one last comment?
Yeah, if I may make one closing comment. Thank you for your time. I hope what you've experienced today is the dedication of the staff of GoEd, how competent they are, how well-versed they are. In a myriad of conversations that we've had today, we've been asked to address a lot of social issues, economic issues, none of them should be left off the table, but you can admit that they're diverse. And so I hope you appreciate the vast knowledge that you have at your fingertips and the quality of folks that you have at your disposal and administering the people's money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to your team for all they're doing. And we look forward to hearing the follow-ups from all the questions. Thank you very much. So with that, this is the only agency on our agenda, so we'll move to public comment. And as our guests vacate the area they're in, we'll have public comment in Carson City come forward. And if there is anybody in Las Vegas, if you'd like to come to the table, we'll go to you next. I don't see anybody here in Las Vegas. I'm sorry, Carson City. We'll go to Las Vegas. Not seeing anybody in Las Vegas, we'll go to the lines. BPS, when you're ready, please, during public comment, dial 888-475-4499, and then enter the meeting ID 811-6084-1053 and press pound. When asked for a participant ID, please press pound. So BPS, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to offer public comment for today's meeting, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once more, that is *9 now to take your place in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
I can. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Natalie Fry, N-A-T-A-L-I-E-F-R-Y, and I am the Research Communications Director for the University of Nevada, Reno's Division of Research and Innovation. My comment today is in favor and encouragement for continued support of the Nevada Knowledge Account. As a communications professional working at the university for more than 15 years, I have the great pleasure of telling the stories of the innovative work, impactful discoveries, and inspiring people at the university, all which are continuing to directly impact the state and diversify Nevada's economy. With support through the Knowledge Fund, I am happy to say that the projects and stories keep coming my way. I am working currently with Richard Kelly, Senior Engineer with the University of Nevada, Reno, Center for Applied Research and Project Lead for Intelligent Mobility, just one of the research initiatives supported by the Knowledge Fund. Intelligent Mobility is working on solutions for safe, clean, and efficient transportation. Richard and his research group are collaborating with the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County and, in participation and partnership with RTC, are using a real-world living lab in downtown Reno and collecting data from RTC buses. Richard and his research group have retrofitted buses with advanced sensors and artificial intelligence and are now testing a new first-of-its-kind digital twin technology in the streets of Reno, leading to tangible safety improvements of our community's roadways. Additional research and researchers, including a number of student researchers, continue to work with roadside sensors to improve traffic efficiency, reduce accidents for wildlife and road users alike, and facilitate the use of autonomous vehicles. The initiatives within Intelligent Mobility truly are a collaborative effort and reach across the entire state. They work with civil engineers, smart vehicle developers, private and public partners, stakeholders like NDOT, City of Reno, RTC Washoe, RTC of Southern Nevada, the U.S. DOT, University Transportation Center, the Federal Transit Administration, the National Judicial College, GoEd, and others, and with businesses such as Switch, Proterra, Velodyne LiDAR, and more. In GoEd's 5-year comprehensive economic development strategy, it provides strategic action steps to realizing Nevada's electric, innovative, and connected future. The University of Nevada, Reno has many more initiatives like Richard's with great stories to tell that are electrifying, innovating, and connecting us for a better future. Your continued support of the Knowledge Fund will continue to make a difference for Nevadans and for many others. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next caller, please.
Thank you, Chair. There are no other callers on the line wishing to offer public comment at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, committee members, this completes our business for today. I hope you all have a good and productive day, and we'll see you, some of you, tomorrow morning in different committees.